Good morning. Oh, that didn't sound like a good morning. Let me try it again. Good morning.
Good morning.
Ah, there you go. So welcome. My name is Jonathan McLean, and I am the Chief Executive Officer for the Center for Alternative Sentencing and Employment Services, or CASES, as many of you know. I'd like to warmly welcome you all to today's panel discussion on solutions for recovery and community safety here at the historic Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. I'd like to thank Mutual of America for hosting today's event, and also would like to thank our partnering foundations and donors who've come to join us in this really, really important, critical event today. In 2021, Mutual of America selected CASES Nathaniel Project for its National Community Partnership Award. The Nathaniel Project began in 2000 when advocates urged CASES to develop what would become the city's first alternative to incarceration program for people living with serious mental illness who had felony arrests. One of the program's first clients was a 32-year-old black man named Nathaniel. Throughout much of his life, Nathaniel had continuous involvement with public systems. He grew up in foster care. He attended special education classes in school. At age 10, he was treated in a psychiatric hospital. And from the time he arrived in New York City at the age of 17, he lived homeless in the streets and cycled in and out of jails and prisons. During those 15 years in New York City, Nathaniel was arrested 19 times. During those 15 years, he was never treated for his mental illness. We're gathered here today because that was not the end of Nathaniel's story. Following that 19th arrest, he was given an opportunity to be released from Rikers Island and enrolled in what would later become the Nathaniel Assertive Community Treatment Program, Nathaniel ACT, a truly innovative adaptation of the evidence-based ACT mobile treatment model as an alternative to incarceration. I don't have to remind everyone who's come out this morning about the ongoing systemic racism that has defined who is arrested and incarcerated in this country. 9 out of 10 people incarcerated at Rikers are black or Latino. More than half have a mental illness, and nearly 1 in 5 have a serious mental illness. We know about the unspeakable harm and brutality inside Rikers, but we also know about the vulnerability of the people living with serious mental illness in the community. Research has shown that they are as much as 140 times more likely than the general population to be victims of violence, as we saw so tragically in the death of Jordan Neely last week on our city subways. The challenge for our city and for all of us in this room and for community members like Nathaniel are difficult and persistent, but they are not insurmountable. Please know that just a short walk from the Schomburg, Nathaniel, now in his late 50s, is living in recovery from his mental illness and has his own place in supportive housing. Nathaniel's story is representative of the resilience and hard work of so many Nathaniel program clients over the years. The program's predominantly black and Latino participants have consistently achieved improvements in health, housing, and community engagement, including employment. Of Nathaniel's graduates since 2015, 93% have avoided any new conviction, and 100% have had no new violent felony conviction in the 2 years after their completion of the program. When I joined CASES this past September, I knew about his reputation as an organization operating innovative programs like Nathaniel ACT, but that wasn't the only reason why I wanted to join this organization. As some of you in this room know, as a formerly incarcerated person, the work of cases is personal to me. We are here today because of our humanity is tied into the humanity of the people we serve. Our family members, friends, and neighbors living with criminal legal system involvement and serious mental illness. We are here today because of people. People comprised of flesh and blood. People who lead nuanced, complex lives and who deserve to be treated with the same dignity and respect we would want for ourselves. No person living with mental illness in a city deserves to live in a city or live a life where their basic needs are not met, yet it happens every day. No person living with mental illness in a city deserves a life where the de facto treatment option is a jail or a prison, yet it happens every day. No person living with mental illness in the city should be devalued and disparaged because they are black or brown, yet it happens every day. And no person living in the city with mental illness deserves to be brutalized and killed because they are struggling with that illness. So today we are here to discuss solutions that are proven to work. This doesn't mean that these are panaceas to problems rooted in systemic racism, intergenerational neglect, and our confounding unwillingness as a society to provide for people's basic needs. But we believe that these are the solutions that best meet the needs of the people we serve. In his famous "Where do we go from here" speech, the Honorable Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. eloquently framed the difficult yet necessary road to racial justice in America. He reminded us that, as painful as it is, we must walk on in the days ahead with an audacious faith in the future. Nathaniel ACT was founded in that kind of audacious faith. People living with serious mental illness and arrested for felony charges deserve compassionate care, and if engaged in real solutions, can achieve healing and recovery in the community. I'm now pleased to share a few moments from the story of one of the people we have had the honor of serving, his name is Sal, in a video produced by Mutual of America in honor of our award, as a final introduction to the work of Nathaniel ACT. After that, we'll go straight into our panel conversation with distinguished guests, the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, Ann Sullivan, Commissioner of New York State Office of Mental Health, and Megan Kirk, Treatment Team Leader of Cases Nathaniel ACT Team. Thank you all for coming together here this morning and for your audacious faith in the hard and sometimes messy work of real solutions for recovery and community safety. I want to say one more thing before we go into the video. We are in a phenomenal historic place. Please make sure, if you don't get a chance to do it today, to check out the Marking Time exhibit, Art in the Age of Mass Incarceration. Thank you.
The mental health system failed, though, because I begged for help. Unfortunately, he had to be arrested to get help.
My mental illness it's a life that I've been given and that I have to live. My diagnosis is schizophrenia. It progressively worsened. I was hallucinating. The reason that I struck the man I struck is because I thought he was the devil and he wanted to hurt me somehow. And out of a state of fear, I reacted. I spent 29 months behind bars. At Rikers Island, I was in mental health units. I was compliant with my medication. I was attending therapy sessions. I was in court with these charges of assault. The judge acknowledging that I had suffered from mental health problems when I committed my crime, and knowing that I was working really hard to be better, offered to release me into the Nathaniel ACT team's care.
When people come out of jail, we literally meet them at the moment they're released. They're hungry. They may not have anywhere to live. They may come out with a Metro card and one outfit. We may buy them a bag of toiletries, a sweatshirt, and some boots.
They helped me get housing. It would fill up my fridge, deal with the pharmacy, take me to doctor's appointments, and they were showing up at my house. I could see them anywhere from 2 to 6 times a week. To have someone that you can just dial at any time, that was really essential for me to get over the trauma I sustained while I was incarcerated. Had I failed to complete the program in the mental health court, I would have had to go to prison for 7.5 years. And the person who I actually struck, he found it in his heart to forgive me. He wanted me to get help.
Jesus gave him a second chance. He's going back to college, and he's working hard to make sure people understand the mental illness is real.
I didn't think, finally I'm free. I thought about everybody who was not going home. They needed the same kind of empathy that I needed. Our crimes may have been different, but the circumstances were somewhat similar.
Welcome, panelists. How are you all this morning?
Great.
Good. You guys, good. All right, so let's get started. First question is for DA Bragg and Commissioner Sullivan, and you can find out who wants to answer this one first. What programs and efforts are you focusing on currently to help people with serious mental illness or with criminal legal system involvement?
Well, just to begin, if that's okay? Just to begin, I think that certainly, what was described today in terms of Nathaniel ACT is one of the big pieces of what we do, which is ACT teams. But I have to emphasize that across our system of care, we have services that work with individuals who've gotten into the criminal justice system. But also to just say that in this budget, we have not only dollars to enhance that, but dollars to enhance the infrastructure so we can prevent people from ever getting to that point of getting into the criminal justice system. And I think you really have to do both. We are dealing, when someone's made it to the criminal justice system, we've kind of failed them along the way. And we have services for that, but we also need to build the infrastructure. So the infrastructure that's coming out of the governor's budget massively increases our clinic services, our crisis services, which including stabilization centers, crisis respite, 988. All those services are getting enhanced significantly, like 39 communities, certified community behavioral health centers from 13. So it's a huge increase. On the other end are the individuals who have not connected well with us, who have kind of lost connection to the system or gotten into the criminal justice system. And there will be dollars in the new system that we're concentrating on to increase the ACT teams, that's forensic ACT teams, the Nathaniel ACT teams. There will be dollars for housing. Housing's a critical piece, as we all know. If you don't have a safe place to put your head, that's not helpful. So the budget will include 3,600 new units of housing across the state, and some of that's going to be transitional housing, something we haven't done before, which will enable individuals leaving prisons, leaving jails, to have a transitional place to stay that's safe with supportive people who can help them get back into the community, get the mental health services they need, and get housing. The other piece of it is teams that we're putting out across the system to work with hospitals. Another big piece of the problem is that individuals go to emergency rooms for help. Sometimes they get admitted to hospitals, but when they leave, an immediate availability. I loved what was in the video that Nathaniel ACT goes immediately to see somebody. We haven't done that as well as we need to. So these teams, which are calling critical time intervention teams, will be wrapped around hospitals and EDs so that individuals leaving have that kind of connection to treatment right away, and an assistance in getting into housing right away, a safe place to be. So we're going to be putting up 50 of those teams. We're going to be putting up an additional 42 ACT teams. So I can go through all the numbers. But what I have to say is that the reality here is that the work that we're doing to work with all these populations, there's a significant impact in this budget. It's $1 billion that's coming to mental health. And I've never seen that before. I've been around a long time. So that's a big boost. And then we also have a lot of reentry services, which I won't go into detail, but are really extensive from the prison system. And they include that many of our seriously mentally ill, before they leave prison, spend time in special units in the state prison, getting them ready for the community. We also have housing that we've connected for the community. Nathaniel ACT works with some of our guys who come out of the prison, guys and gals come out of the prison system. So we have a whole big reentry program, then we have a crisis system, and then we have some diversion programs. A little bit more of them that we've done upstate. The city does a lot in the city. But those diversion programs also work with communities to help individuals avoid getting into jail, but getting the services they need in the community. So it's an exciting time, I think, to be expanding the services that we have. And I think that there's a commitment for people who've gotten lost in the system, and also lots of services for sadly, our homeless individuals with mental illness who end up living on the streets. That's another big investment in both housing and teams to work with them. So just one.
A lot of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, Bragg?
I'm phenomenally excited about this $1 billion. I have been since the governor announced it in the State of the State, and we were talking about it beforehand. I mean, obviously things have become more acute because of COVID dislocations, but as you said in your remarks, this is intergenerational. I was thinking as you were speaking about, when I first learned about cases when I was interning at the Neighborhood Defender Service of Harlem, which is about 10 blocks away from here. And I was leaving that college internship and walking home to where I grew up right around the corner from here. And many of the conditions you're talking about were on full display during that 15-block walk. And Cases was hard at work addressing that then, but as the commissioner said, this infusion of $1 billion is really, really new, and I think meets the moment. At the district attorney's office, we're trying to do exactly what the commissioner said, sort of on the front end with community investments in prevention, and all the way to so obviously working Nathaniel ACT and ROAR and scaling up our ATI. So I'll just give a couple of examples on the front end. It's not $1 billion, but we invested $9 million in a procurement process that we started last year that has, I'll just talk about one of the components, maybe later there'll be time to talk about the others, kind of peer navigators in our communities in up to 6 Manhattan neighborhoods connecting with people in distress on the street. And we know those kind of connections take time, they take know-how, and they take people who know the neighborhoods and have the expertise, like people at Cases. So funding those groups in up to 6 neighborhoods so they don't ever get to us. That's right. That's on the front end. And then on the back end, we've started a new division called Pathways to Public Safety, the thesis of which is early intervention, early assessment of cases so that we can get them connected with cases earlier. I saw some of our partners in the judiciary as well here who've been very helpful in standing that up. And our rate of referrals to our felony alternative to incarceration court, our mental health court, is up very, very high. And I'm, at the same time that all the crime stats in Manhattan are going down. And I think that juxtaposition is what we're all talking about. This is public safety work.
No, phenomenal. Just the onus on the front end work is really exciting, even though we're in trying times. So thank you both for that. Megan, this question is for you, and maybe Commissioner Sullivan, you can tag on. ACT is a team-based approach. Why does it work so well? And what are the key aspects that make this approach so successful?
Absolutely. Assertive community treatment is a multidisciplinary team of professionals with different areas of expertise, different strengths. And so we really work together and partner with each client to develop a highly individualized treatment plan based on their particular circumstances and needs, as well as the particular providers that they may be working with, their families, community members they identify as supports. So we're really addressing from the ground up in a human person-to-person way, what is at the heart of recovery? What does it look like not only to complete treatment and complete your mandate, but build a life that's worth living? And so we have medical professionals, we have 2 criminal justice specialists, 2 peer specialists, vocational specialist, a housing specialist, a program assistant, and of course me, 2 nurses, nurse practitioner who is a prescriber or a psychiatrist, to address all of the needs of a person.
Do you go to people, or is it?
Absolutely. We have a minimum of 80% contacts in the community. So we go to people literally wherever they are. That may be in their home, maybe in the street, shelter, hospital, any setting where a person is, we go throughout all 5 boroughs, which is something that makes Nathaniel ACT unique. In addition to being New York City's first and only, hopefully not for long, alternative to incarceration assertive community treatment team, we do serve all 5 boroughs and travel to where people are.
So you answered my next question, because I was going to ask you, we have so many acronyms. So the difference between Nathaniel ACT and I would say regular ACT teams is that Nathaniel ACT is you said it, alternative to incarceration program?
That's right, an alternative to incarceration or increasingly alternative to detention. And it's true, the city does have other forensic assertive community treatment teams, but the people we serve in particular have a criminal legal mandate, and we're helping them navigate that process. When people are referred to our ATI intake team, led by Director Sarah Fay, not sure if she's here today, potential participants are assessed for all of our ATI programs. Once eligibility is established, there is, of course, a wait list. Right now, it's about half an ACT team of people who are waiting to join. And just based on the statistics that you had mentioned earlier, if 1 in 5 people in Rikers has a diagnosis of serious mental illness, and the population of Rikers was about 5,500 last year, that means there are 20 ACT teams on the island waiting to come out and integrate into the community. So yes, there are teams that have the forensic component, but we do work with people on the legal mandate, and then we help people transition to their next appropriate level of care, whether that's more traditional and independent ability to function has been regained, like a clinic setting, or clinic setting with something like Home Health Plus to support that transition to a lower level of care, could be a lateral or higher level of care, completely individualized.
Thank you, Megan. And just to be clear, these are individuals who would, if not for Nathaniel ACT, they would probably be in jail.
That is absolutely the case. There's a collaboration to identify each potential client's needs to ensure that when they come to us, typically right from the courtroom with us, we escort home to see what that environment is like. Before any of that happens, there is a determination of needs, a review of records, what has gone wrong, and how can we set this person up for success. And so absolutely, it's often a condition of release that somebody might have some housing in place. They may have, us as treatment in place.
Thank you. Commissioner Sullivan, anything you want to add about ACT teams, New York, anything in particular?
Just to say that, ACT teams were, when they were first established, they were called treatment centers without walls. And I think that that's the way they've always functioned. They work with individuals where they need it, when they need it, and whatever they need. And I think it's that flexibility and that intensity and that engagement, that ability to work with someone, because so often the individuals who come to us have multiple problems. And you have a team that can deal with pretty much all of them in terms of combination of their criminal, legal, housing, et cetera. And then that team gets to know the individual, they get connected, and they make a relationship that can last and that can help someone grow. And I think that that's really the power behind it. And then we just need to grow those across the state. General ACT teams, we have about 120 across the state. And we're going to be, though they have a little higher caseload than yours, but we're going to be adding these other 40. So it's a significant number. It'll be almost 8,000 individuals when we're done who will be able to access ACT teams of one form or another. And so it's a wonderful model, and it's been shown to really help people move who just are not capable of navigating what can often be a difficult system, our mental health system. So it's wonderful to work. And the Nathaniel team in particular does everything in terms of the legal and criminal issues that have come up that get you into the legal system. And you know that, you know how to deal with it. And that's critical because it's something we do not have that expertise in a lot of our base services. So you do, and that enables those individuals to traverse those systems successfully. So it's great. It's an absolutely great program that we're very proud to be connected with you about.
Thank you for that.
D.A. Bragg, this question is for you. You've led an initiative where your office will directly fund community mental health services, recognizing that the criminal legal system is not the right place to treat mental illness and substance use conditions. How can these initiatives be bolstered so arrest and incarceration stop being the default response to the mental health crisis? It's a long question, right?
I was trying to know where to start. I'll go back to what the commissioner said, and I can talk about what we're doing about the housing. And we all talk about it. We all know the need for it. But I will say, and that's one of the reasons I'm most excited about the $1 billion and that commitment, because that would address a lot of the things that we see, right? We, in our attempts to sort of have more cases connected, we are often, making very challenging decisions about sort of what is available to any one individual. And of course, we have a range, a suite of services, probably far more so in Manhattan than maybe perhaps anywhere else in the country. But what we have a shortage of is housing. And so if I put my finger on one thing that we desperately need to scale up our work, is housing. And we have some, and you know them well because it's in partnership with you, we have some extraordinary examples of people who are connected to care and who have either had a case initiated, but then have been able to sort of resolve it through your programs. But a lot of those examples, the ones that stand out, are the folks who got the access to the housing and the wraparound services. And the real issue for us as we're looking to, and are really kind of scaling up, is that we're hitting up upon capacity. There's just not a bed for everyone who needs it. And so that to me is the issue that we come back to sort of time and time again. And there are glimmers of hope, and there's lots of people at work. I know I'm not, particularly for this audience, breaking new ground, but it is just so true, and it presents itself like every single day in our work in really sobering and profoundly sad ways.
Yeah, the housing issue, it's true, right? People, if you don't have a place to rest your head, how can you think about any other thing, any other service, any other intervention, if you don't have a place to sleep, if you don't have a place to rest your head? Basic needs, which seems pretty simple, but is extremely complicated in this city. Yeah, thank you.
I would also like to point out that it's not just a basic need, but for people with serious mental illness, if you're sleep deprived, it's not just uncomfortable. It may cause or seriously exacerbate symptoms of mania, psychosis, and the same thing with nutritional imbalance. So when we talk about securing housing, a safe place to sleep, food, it's not just do-gooding, it's also helping with mental health stabilization.
Oh, thank you for that, Megan. Great point, great point. D.A. Bragg, another question for you. Currently, 1 in 5 individuals on records has a serious mental illness, as we mentioned earlier. The majority of these individuals do not have access to appropriate or any treatment and will leave Rikers destabilized and without connections to care in the community. How can providers like us, and you've alluded to our connection, partner with your office and other DAs to divert people into treatment instead of incarceration?
So the great thing is we're doing it every day. A couple of examples I was thinking about, someone who's really cycled in and out, not dissimilar to the video we saw, who recently had a burglary charge at a kind of large retail store in downtown Manhattan. And you could look at the history and you see this sort of cycle, and this is someone that's been out 9 days before the most recent charge that presented recently to us, and using the resources we've been talking about, the person is on a great path, and so it is doing that just to scale, which we're doing, and so I don't know in terms of sort of enhancements. I feel like the work is being done, and what we need to be doing more of is, I think, framing this discussion more broadly for the public as public safety work, as things that are not, as you said, do-gooding, right? I think that's how a lot of people think about this work, is, those are the people that are gonna hug some trees and, but to really put this in the context of this is what we need to do for strong communities and safety. And so I think in a lot of ways the work is there. We're doing it, and I have other just sort of phenomenally, I'm thinking about an arson case that we've collaborated on, where people who are just on really great paths. You look at real departures from their recent past and sort of how long they've kind of remained stable. But just I think it's the telling of those stories beyond these walls and beyond these conferences, and sort of going out and getting that into what I think is really sort of a recoil on the narrative and the pushback that this is inconsistent with or undermining safety. I think that's really where we have to really be steadfast and continue to sort of always frame it as around not the do-gooding, but this is this is consistent with and indeed advancing public safety.
It's interesting, you talked about the narratives and the stories that are told and the importance of giving life to these stories, because there's good work being done, and there's success stories that are happening every day. Yeah, there are things, people struggling and failures, but there's just as many successes that are happening that we often don't hear about because they're not put out there.
Right. Well, and on the, if I just want one more point, on the failures, I think it's 70% recidivism rate for people returning from state prison. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a failure rate, right. 70%. And so putting it in context when we talk about quote unquote failure, right. Is again, not all, it's not gonna be linear, it's not gonna be a one-to-one, but we certainly know that incarceration is not too.
Absolutely.
And just to add that, to what you said about the recidivism, we monitored when individuals with serious mental illness left, just prison period, this was a number of years ago they did the study, they came back at that rate. When we had housing, kind of Nathaniel ACT teams, case management, cut that in half. So it's certainly doable. The question is having enough to be able to do it successfully, but it is doable. People leaving prisons, they need those supports. And if you give it to them, you can really cut that recidivism rate right in half.
That $1 billion.
Yep.
Commissioner Sullivan, so, in the line of housing, we've been talking a lot about housing. Specifically, as we've talked about, many of the individuals we serve are homeless, and we've talked about the importance of stable housing. Specifically, how is OMH, as OMH expands its housing portfolio, are there efforts to develop housing specifically for those with serious mental illness and criminal legal system involvement? I know you kind of touched on it, but just any details about what that will look like for folks in our programs?
Yeah, one of the issues with all of our housing is siting housing. Let me just say this. And I think that that's where your point about getting out to the public and letting them realize that this is something we all have to work on and communities have to be a part of. So we did put out some forensic dollars for forensic housing and a number of years ago, and we had trouble getting providers.
And when you say siting, you mean identifying sites for housing?
Physical places.
Physical plants.
Even apartments, right. Whether you're going to build an apartment or even if you're going to do scatter site apartments. It's having communities understand the importance of this work and just the kind of services that someone has so that they're not frightened of having individuals in their community who've had a criminal justice history. So that's a big piece of it. So what we're going to be doing again, we use RFPs as the language we use. We're going to be putting out, again, housing specific for forensic, for those individuals leaving jails and prisons, but also involved in the criminal justice system in the community. There's different types of housing we have, and one of the ones which I just briefly mentioned called transitional housing is something we want to look at, especially for this population, so they could get into it quickly. It's a housing first model. You come in, you get the housing right away, and then maybe permanent housing a little bit down the road, but with lots of supports. So yes, we will be specifically targeting. Often when you do supportive housing outreach, you have to have lots of services built into the housing. So we pay more for that for forensic, and we will in these RFPs coming out so that there'll be more supports for individuals in the housing. That's the 3,500, 3,600 that are coming out now. We also have our pipeline housing, which is coming out another 2,000 or 3,000 each year.
And pipeline housing is?
Ishai, the Empire State's, the 20,000 supported units that everybody's been talking about over the years, that continues to come out. Often 2,000 to 3,000 of those appear every year. as you went out the 10 years. So that's a big influx of housing. So yes, some of it will absolutely be targeted for this population, and we need the providers out there to work with us with it, and we also need the communities to work with us.
Right, that's a great point about the challenges of people living with mental illness, being in the community, and communities openly accepting your neighbors, our fellow city dwellers. Yeah, thank you. DA Bragg, when people have serious mental illness, their cases tend to take much longer. How can we develop programs working with stakeholders like you to move these cases through quicker?
So, I mean, this is something that's been a particular focus for us when we look at our population in Rikers in particular. What drives that number, I think probably for all boroughs, but certainly in Manhattan, is just the length of time, the duration of the case. And we see that in cases involving mental health being particularly long. So when I talked about new division we've started, Pathways to Public Safety, a really driving premise of that is early intervention. Having our offices divided, much of our street crimes is handled in 6 bureaus, and having people embedded in each of those bureaus with expertise, and so that everyone have someone to go to, and really with the thought that right after arraignments, assessing and not waiting for a defense motion that might happen in 9 months, not waiting to see about other pretrial litigation, but affirmatively and proactively assessing and then having that assessment done by people who have true expertise, and I say true expertise as the lawyers, but then also talking to and relying on clinicians. And so that we're already starting to see affecting our length of stay and our diversion rate. And so that's what, I mean, you asked me, I think, what folks need to do. I'd like to start at home about what we need to do, and that's what we need to do, and that's what we're doing.
Great, thank you. Megan, this question is for you. Can you talk about the role of partnerships in the effectiveness of Nathaniel ACT, the only one in the city, I might add, beginning with the court process and the moving, supporting people in the community?
Absolutely. I think we touched on this a little bit earlier. From the very point a potential client is identified, there's a sort of partnership. We see people who are identified as a potential client and referred to us, cases.org/referrals. Really easy link from the mental health courts, from an increasing number of defense attorneys, forensic institutions, but also an increasing number of self-referrals based on word of mouth and recommendations from existing clients.
So can I ask you about that? How does that work? How does the self-referral walk into Nathaniel ACT and receive services? They just walk into the program? How does that work?
Well, you would visit the website, or you would contact ATI intake, and you would be assessed, you or the person whom you're referring, for all of the ATI programs, and you would then be informed what is the best fit for you. If it's Nathaniel, we, DA, any other providers involved, Center for Justice Innovation, potential housing providers, we all coordinate to identify and address the needs to make a plan to set people up for success on their release. And we, on the day of admission into our program, identify a series of immediate needs that we can then address in the moment, while we're also collaboratively developing that individualized treatment plan centered around the client's own goal, which often includes completion of the mandate, but also very often includes other things. I want to go back to school. I want to talk to my family again. Whatever the case may be, we're there to support. From there on, we also partner with the providers that I mentioned, housing, the mental health courts, also other like assisted outpatient treatment. We have a number of clients who are involved in other systems, and we certainly help them navigate those as well. If someone does end up in a place of confinement, like a hospital, or has another charge, we also help them navigate that.
Excellent.
Excuse me, can I say something? Hi, I'm Dr. Musat. I'm from Kirk. I'm Director of Psychiatry. I think that Dr. Sullivan knows us. but we did start, I work for a forensic hospital, Kirby, I'm sure that you all know, it's the only forensic hospital in the city. And we partnered with cases on our own initiative in 2005, and at that time, with Dr. Daniel Selling and Dr. Jessica Claver, we started, at that time we were the only second in the country for diversion of violent felonies, and we went through a hard time. It was before your time with the DA's office in Manhattan. We do have another system than the other facilities. We do refer patients while they're still being treated. The moment they stabilize a little bit, we do refer them to cases. And we do know all the criteria. We put a phone call and a referral, and they do come and see them. Before COVID, they would come in person. Right now, like they come and, like they see them through telepsychiatry, and this is how we refer them. So I just needed to mention that because it was a big endeavor for us to start something that initially honestly, not even Albany knew. So,
No, we know.
thank
We know
you.
in Albany. We know.
They know in Albany.
I didn't mention it, but we know in Albany. No, yes, we know. No, but they knew. They knew in Albany. They knew in Albany.
No, but thank you for that, because this is a prime example of forging partnerships that didn't previously exist. So really, thank you for giving us that example, and I'm happy it was with us. So thank you for sharing that.
No, it's great work. It really is great
It
work.
is.
And it's.
And it's really actually the way if you want to know how the patients also know, the patients have your cards, and the first moment the patients who are a little bit more put together, they enter Kirby, they ask us about cases. But unfortunately, we can only address like we really appreciate cases. It gives them such a hope. You cannot imagine how excited they are that somebody's gonna help them navigate all this, and they do know that if they are gonna relapse or not do well, they know everything, and they agree with AOD, with Atkins, with everything. So that's a big deal for us because we managed to make them fit, give them hope, and they work harder on the fitness issues so we can move them faster. The only thing is that we can only do this for Manhattan.
Right.
Like the other boroughs have mental health court, and they kind of function in a different way. So the patients that hear this from other boroughs are very disappointed. So
Well, this is an
Always
example,
work on
and
that.
we're a little pressed for time, so thank you so much for that. But again, prime example of partnerships forged that previously didn't exist. And you've actually set up a question for all of you as panelists. We've talked about some existing partnerships, but we live in a city where there are multiple systems. There's the substance use system, there's the education system, there's the child welfare system. How do we forge more partnerships to ensure that people who come through or that we work with, that we touch, that they can get the services that they need from everyone? I mean, is there work being done in other areas that hasn't previously? I know we all work together, but when you think about the system as a whole and all of these multiple areas that people can, the doors that people can come in, what are you all doing to increase our capacity to form partnerships system-wide?
Well, one of the things that we've recently started, is a kind of centralized way to bring together all the providers in the city around someone leaving the prison system. Mm-hmm. So I think CUCS runs it for us, and basically they come together as a team to really look at the needs of the individuals leaving the prison system that are coming back to the city. And it includes the whole host of agencies, the housing agencies, all these agencies. So the people come together and plan. We used to have you refer through different spokes of the wheel, and then it would never quite get all together. So that's one way. I think you have to bring providers together around these issues so that they can all talk about the needs of the individuals as they come out. And I think similarly with Nathaniel ACT, you're taking those individuals straight from the court system without having to go through the bureaucracy, and making that kind of connection right away for those clients. Those are the kinds of flexibilities of people working together that I think we need to do more of, because people can just fall through the cracks just because the bureaucracy can be kind of difficult to navigate. So I think those are coming together, and those kinds of partnerships. And then whenever we set up anything, we have to do it, our whole crisis system is partnerships.
Right.
It's partnerships with housing, it's partnerships with 988, it's partnerships with 911. I mean, all that crisis system has to be a community coming together to say this is an issue we all have to face. So that involves coalitions and partnerships and everybody coming together.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And we've been doing much of the same, and I think we're really strong in Manhattan, probably in the city generally, with sort of cohesion and discussion. What I've been trying to do more of is talk to the folks who are affected, which in our role is fraught at the DA's office. But I'll just give you one example. We have a sort of a nascent reentry council. I was thinking about that when the commissioner was talking about supporting people and getting that number cut down. And sitting around with them as we're forming it, sort of a self-governance model, but listening to them talk about the labyrinth is just illuminating.
Right.
And so doing more of that.
Wonderful. Megan, anything you want to add to that?
I would agree with everything that's been said, and I was just thinking back, part of what led me to this work is that I used to practice criminal defense, and what becomes obvious when you sit down and talk with someone who's affected is that only resolving the instant legal case doesn't take care of all of those other needs. And so having those partnerships, being available, doing warm handoffs, meeting people who are involved in the care, all of that's very important.
So we're coming to the end, and I have one more question, and I think it's apropos that we end with you, Megan. Would you be able to close with a story of what Nathaniel ACT means to our clients? Can you share a recent client success story? We talked about the narrative and hearing success stories. Can you share one with us?
Absolutely. If we have time, I'll share two briefly.
We have
Bonus. First, I'll tell you the story of a client named C, who is a Black man in his early 30s from New York City, who was, to give you a little history, removed from his family at birth and put into foster care. Unfortunately, that placement was not permanent. He had a rather transient childhood and experienced every kind of abuse you can imagine inside his home and in his community for perceived effeminacy. As a child, he developed anxiety and depression, for which he did have services arranged. He tried to do everything right, graduated from high school, enrolled in college, got a job, struggled to cope with the trauma and the symptoms he was experiencing. When we learned about C, he had been arrested for C felony attempted assault and had been homeless for about a year. He did have providers, but he had trouble making those appointments. In fact, he also had trouble making court appointments, which is what put him on our radar. When our intake team interviewed C, he anticipated to go back out in the community, homeless, with no money, no IDs, and no way how things could be different, even though he had stabilized and responded to treatment really well while incarcerated. In fact, it was noticed that his symptoms started to include more extreme behaviors, smearing blood and feces, responding to internal stimuli, and so likely experiencing hallucinations, and his diagnosis became schizophrenia. We met C where he was. He had housing on release and admission to the team. We helped him work through replacing those IDs, getting an income, getting food, getting to know what he needed to take the next steps in his life. And today I can tell you, C moved into his own apartment last week. He is working 6 days a week at a job, getting overtime, and he's pursuing his creative interests on the side. He's reestablished a relationship with his biological family with healthy boundaries, and he's doing very well. And those are great milestones for anybody, and we're very proud of him. And I'd like to tell you a second story, which tells you a little bit about how I think of success working on an ACT team. And this is a story of a man I'll call T, who is also in his early 30s, Afro-Latino man, who on admission to an ACT team, no sooner we would bring him to his residence than he would disappear. No matter how distinctive somebody looks, it's very hard to find an individual in New York City with a little more information than that. We would do our best to engage. We would find him during diligent search at a hospital, show up, not there. Ugh. Finally, T was restored to fitness, and during the time he was in institutional care, we engaged via video technology conference to get to know him, to establish some rapport in the hopes that he would continue engaging with us when he was back in the community. And we had some nice conversations, and a cat appeared on the screen, my cat. And he said, tell me about that cat. What is that cat's name? And luckily, I was not the only team member with a pet at home. And that really forged a connection. And we held our breath when we escorted T to his residence from hospitalization. And lo and behold, he was there the next time we tried him. Sometime later, T had stayed in the residence. He had greatly reduced his substance use, mostly maintained medication adherence, which had been completely unheard of before. And one day, we were reviewing his progress and his goals, and he said, you know what did it? I really liked your cat. And so I like to think of what we do with persistence and creativity, creating conditions where the client can find their cat, the catalyst for change.
I want to thank you all. You have been phenomenal. Please give a big round of applause for our esteemed panelists. And I want to thank you all for coming and joining us today in really honoring and celebrating this really, really critical work. Thank you. Thank you all.
That's great.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's great.